Hello, everyone, and welcome to Loop and Learn's T1D speaker series with a special event today. We're here with Tidepool Loop, Howard Look, who's co-founder and CEO, and Brandon Arbiter, who's VP of Business Development. What's so unusual about this is a fairly historic approval by the FDA, approving an open source product done by a nonprofit. That's the uniqueness of this. That's why this is so exciting and new, and it'll take some adjustment time. But you're going to hear some fun and interesting things. You'll learn about their journey, and just sit along. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be sharing all the questions in the chat. Please keep yourselves unmuted. And this will be recorded and will be up on the YouTube channel. We always do our disclaimer. So the DIY Loop app is a do-it-yourself closed loop algorithm. And now Tidepool Loop is an FDA-approved version. Yay. So we always do this, and we say, if you are using a DIY loop, you take full responsibility for building and running this system, and you do so at your own risk, and you consult with your healthcare professionals regarding your diabetes management. And yes, this is hot news. So we are first, yay. And tomorrow you'll be able to listen to podcasts. So Stacy Sims recorded her podcast. It will be released tomorrow if you want to hear more. And if you want to hear even more, Scott Benner on Juicebox Podcasts will be releasing his even before Stacy's. So you can just like overdose on Tidepool and still be all day. So there we are, and it'll be in those chats. So
I'm not sure that's my favorite metaphor, Joanne.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
But they are great interviews, and
yes, they are.
Excited for everybody to take a listen.
So let's talk about Tidepool, because what is it? What do you mean it's a nonprofit? It's a 501c3 nonprofit committed to empowering the next generation of innovations in diabetes management. So last Tuesday, they received FDA clearance for Tidepool Loop. It's an automated insulin dosing app intended for the management of type 1 diabetes in persons 6 years of age and older. It is a patient-led project, which is most unique, and it is the first application of its kind to receive clearance from the US FDA, and is also the first to enable insulin delivery from a compatible Apple Watch. The algorithm technology in Tidepool Loop is intended for use with compatible integrated continuous glucose monitors and alternative controller-enabled pumps. So that's insulin pumps and CGMs to automatically increase, decrease, and suspend delivery of basal insulin based on iCGM readings and predicted glucose values. You're all pretty much familiar with this, but now it's been approved by the US FDA. Howard Look, who is CEO and co-founder, acknowledges the extraordinary support, and this is real important, of the entire diabetes community, including the US FDA, and the contributions of the DIY community and participants in the Loop observational study conducted by the Jabe Center for Health Research. This closed loop has been studied more than any commercially available closed loop on the market. So don't let anyone tell you that, it's new, nobody knows about it. Yes, they do. They have a lot of data, and that's thanks to all of you who contributed your data. Talk about Howard. I've known Howard for a while. He's focused on developing and bringing to market Tidepool Loop, and he's done it. And the key words here: open source, not-for-profit system. And his background is very interesting. VP of software at TiVo, Pixar Animation Studios, Amazon. I met him at Asante Pump Company. He has a BS in engineering from Carnegie Mellon University, and his teenage daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2011.
That's an old bio. She's 23 now.
Okay.
She all grew up.
She's probably out of college. All right, so just to understand how much work Howard has done in this community. In 2015, so yes, we're going back a ways, White House Champions of Change Award for Precision Medicine. He is working for this, and it's wonderful. We're very fortunate that he's on our team on this one. Brandon Arbiter, met him way back in Night Scout days, VP of Business Development He's focused on making diabetes technology smarter and more accessible to patients everywhere. He developed a new generation of apps. Is this old, Brandon? About the nutshell? Oh,
There's more recent things, sure, but we
okay.
can keep going with it.
Okay, he's been an outspoken member of the patient community, advocating greater access to data and expanding the role of software in health management. Prior to joining Tidepool, he was VP at Fresh Direct, where he built the company's data management analytics practice. He was diagnosed at age 27 with type 1 diabetes with a BS in engineering, this is always such a mouthful, BS in engineering management systems, industrial engineering, operations research, economics, earth, and environmental engineering for Columbia University.
You really nailed it when you said BS. That's the important part.
Yes, but you have it. So I'm going to turn this off, and so very grateful that we were able to do this today. And I'm going to turn this over to Howard Look. Thank you, both of you, for being here tonight. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Joanne. I really appreciate everyone coming. It's really good to see you all. I see some friendly faces that I haven't seen in a while, and some names of folks that I started interacting with, like Lane Desborough back in, I think, 2012, the year after my daughter was diagnosed. So
hello.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Lane. So thank you all for coming. And it's been a pretty wild week here at Tidepool. First, let me just tell you a little bit about the company. As Joanne said, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're actually a completely remote distributed team and have been since 2017. We have about 30 employees right now. Got a few more folks coming in on board over the upcoming months, but still a relatively small team. We have two major product platforms, and we'll mostly talk about Tidepool Loop today, but just to remind everybody, Tidepool started as a company devoted to liberating diabetes data, and we did that with the Tidepool data management platform. We developed it through 2013 and 2014, grew through a series of just organic partnerships with clinics like UCSF and Stanford. We eventually supported a study run by the Jaeb Center for Health Research, which helped us grow even further. And we've been giving away the Tidepool data management platform for free as part of our mission as a 501c3 nonprofit, with the goal of helping people living with diabetes and their healthcare providers get access to all their data, to be able to see your CGM data, your pump data, all in one place. A funny thing happened during the pandemic. We grew dramatically, and I certainly wouldn't have planned it that way, but it turns out when you can't see your endocrinologist in person, you need a way to upload data from home, and we were a very popular choice. And over the course of that growth, we got lots of feedback from larger health systems and larger clinics saying, hey, there's functionality that we'd love for you to add to your data management platform. We really love this. So we started adding features and functionality like single sign-on and integration with things like Active Directory and LDAP, for those that knows what those are. And we added a population management dashboard and remote monitoring workflows. And we launched all that new functionality formally last summer at ADA, and we call it Tidepool Plus. And this is really building upon all the work that we did from 2013 through 2022, adding this new functionality, which people have really told us is helping them improve how they can see and manage their diabetes. And in terms of healthcare providers, it's helping them manage large populations of diabetes patients. So we're super excited about that. Tidepool Plus is a paid tier of our Tidepool data management platform. And that's really great because we, as a nonprofit, would love to become self-sustaining. We've been really fortunate to have some super generous donors over the years, and organizations like the Helmsley Charitable Trust and JDRF and the Goldsmith Foundation support us. But over time, we actually hope that the revenue from both Tidepool Plus and what we'll talk about in a minute, Tidepool Loop, will help us to become a self-sustaining nonprofit. So the thing we're here to talk about today is Tidepool Loop, which, as you all know, is Loop is an automated insulin delivery system. Tidepool Loop is our version of Loop. We started with the DIY source code and brought it into Tidepool and put it through our regulatory quality system. And we're very excited that as of last Monday, we received FDA clearance for Tidepool Loop. And as Joanne said, that was very much because of the participation of this community. And I'm sure many people here participated in the DIY Loop observational study. I want to give huge credit to the FDA. When we first started talking to the agency about Loop in late 2017, 2018, one of the things they said to us is, we love real world data. And what better way to get real world data than to ask people using DIY Loop to participate in an observational study. And this is one of my favorite things to say about this study, and I think it's really testament to the incredible motivation of folks participating in the We Are Not Waiting movement and the DIY Loop movement to want to pay it forward. There were over 1,000 people enrolled in the observational study of DIY Loop, over 850 of which contributed from 6 months to over 12 months of data. So if you think about all of that participation in terms of days of use studied in the observational study, the DIY Loop study had over 3 times the amount of data compared to, at the time, the AID systems that were available, the pivotal studies for those AID systems. I see that there are some questions going on in the chat. I'm not paying attention to chat at the moment, but if anybody wants to shout out questions that are relevant while I'm talking, please feel free. So we're super proud of this and frankly, incredibly grateful to the do-it-yourself community, because our submission of Tidepool Loop was completely dependent on this clinical data. We simply could not have done it without the participants in that study. So for those of you here that participated, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you know folks that participated in this study, please pass on our thanks. It was really just an incredible testament and desire to pay it forward. Are there any questions about the clinical study? All right. So for those that don't know, let me spend just a minute talking about what it means to be an interoperable automated glycemic controller, or what the FDA calls an iAGC. So Tidepool Loop is an example of an iAGC, and the iAGC is one of 3 components that create this interoperability pathway that the FDA created starting back in 2018, when they designated the Dexcom G6 as an integrated CGM, or an iCGM. Then a year later, in 2019, they gave the Tandem t:slim X2 the designation of alternate controller enabled pump, or ACE pump. And then they also gave both basal IQ and control IQ, and then later the Omnipod 5, the iAGC designation, which is the interoperability pathway. So Tidepool Loop is one of those. We are an iAGC. And what's great about the pathway that the agency created is that it means we came up with a set of plans and processes. In regulatory nerd speak, they're called SOPs, or standard operating procedures. And what that means is we can add a new iCGM or a new ACE pump, and we can keep adding new iCGMs or new ACE pumps without doing an additional regulatory submission. So we came up with these SOPs and iterated on them and agreed to them with the agency. And the agency basically, with this clearance, has said, as long as you follow the plans and procedures that we agreed to, you can continue to add new CGMs and new ACE pumps over time without a new submission. We think that's a pretty amazing and groundbreaking thing, and that makes Tidepool Loop the first truly interoperable system. There are other iAGCs and other ACE pumps, but as you know, they come from the same company, and they're integrating with their own controller or their own pump. With Tidepool Loop, it is built from the ground up, based on the DIY Loop source code, as a truly interoperable system. So as new ACE pumps and new iCGMs come along that meet our requirements, as long as we follow those plans and processes, then we can add them to the system without any new filings. It also means that everything that you're about to see when we talk about the details of Tidepool Loop, now that we have clearance, we become what is known as a predicate device. And in FDA jargon, that is what you need to do when you submit your 510K. The 510K is basically an application where you're saying to the FDA, we think our device is substantially equivalent to a prior device. So our predicate device was Control-IQ. We showed substantial equivalence to Control-IQ. Now that we are cleared, future device makers can actually use Tidepool Loop as a predicate device. And that's going to become important in just a few minutes when you see some of the features and functionality and things like where the target range is. So let me pause there, see if there's any questions.
Howard, there are a number of questions in chat.
I think we can probably do those towards the end. Just keep rolling because they'll keep piling in.
I was thinking the same thing. Thanks, Joanne. So yeah, we're gonna talk about some features and of Tidepool Loop. Since most of you are familiar with looping, they won't be a surprise to you. We'll talk about where things are with partnerships, and then we're going to open it up for interactive dialogue for Q&A. So that'll be, I imagine, most of our time. So we'll just keep going through the rest of slides here. Howard, did you want to talk any more about FDA and interoperability, or should I move on?
I think I'm good for now. Why don't you get into features and functionality, and then we can come back and talk about partnerships.
Okay, great. So first of all, just give you all a little bit of personal context. Back in, I think it was 2016, I was running OpenAPS, and I walked into an OpenAPS meetup in San Francisco, and a friend of mine, Mark Wilson, said, "Dude, you're not using Loop?" I was like, "Oh, and what's Loop?" And that day I got set up with Loop. And a few months later, I was controlling my diabetes from my Apple Watch. And God, was it amazing. And I think that to me, personally, the DIY community has just raised the bar so much on what managing life with diabetes can be. And as I think towards Tidepool Loop and this FDA submission and this FDA clearance, that's the thing that excites me the most, is just continuing that work to raise the bar, to take what the DIY community, what the Loop community has done, and turn it into what's now, as Howard described, a substantial equivalence or a predicate device. So feature number one that is now FDA cleared and becomes a predicate that other future device companies can point to is Apple Watch control. Tidepool Loop, in our FDA submission, we did include Apple Watch control, as it is in the source from the DIY app. And that is part of our clearance. So really excited to say that is that's in. And now future device makers working with the FDA can say they did it, and now we want to do it. The next feature that I'm particularly excited about is customizable target ranges. So in particular, I think there's been a bunch of questions about, well, what does that customization mean? How configurable is it? Tidepool Loop allows a user in our FDA clearance to set their correction range as low as 87 and as high as 180. So again, this is a first of its kind in the diabetes community. This becomes a predicate, a precedent that other future device companies can point to and say, we can now have greater customization, configurability on our correction ranges. Other features that were, I think, innovated and pioneered in the DIY community that hadn't been in any commercial system before. One is the pre-meal range. This is something I use all the time as a DIY looper myself. Phenomenal, innovative feature that lowers your correction target temporarily for the next hour or until you enter carbs. So that rather than doing a pre-meal bolus, which as all of us living with diabetes know, you do that and you go to the restaurant and you order your food and it takes an hour and a half to come out. And then you're low. The pre-meal range is such an interesting new take on that again was pioneered by the DIY community. And emojis, the pizza bolus. I can't believe somebody thought to just use a pizza emoji for a pizza bolus. That's great. This is, you know, to me, the beginning of hopefully the beginning of the end of all of those percentages and extended bolus, like, oh, how much do you want up front? How much do you want later? This simple concept of like, hey, this isn't about insulin timing. This is about carb timing. And using the real estate of a smartphone, the interface of an iPhone and the features that we're so used to, like these emojis, to tell the system what I'm eating. So again, in the Tidepool Loop submission and now cleared. And the last feature I want to talk about, and it's funny, I just used this like 30 minutes ago, because I went and had dinner about an hour ago, forgot to bolus, came upstairs, turned on my Zoom, and was like, oh, I forgot to bolus. And so I entered the carbs, and I just changed my my carb time by 30 minutes into the past. This is not something that you can do on any commercial system. And what reminded me to do this, and again, this is DIY Loop that I'm using, is I started hearing my insulin pump give me insulin. And I realized my blood sugar must be going up, and I forgot to bolus. Well, now, do I enter all of the carbs that I ate? If I was on a conventional commercial system, I wouldn't have much of a choice. I could like lie to the system and tell it I ate fewer carbs than I actually did, but I might not know exactly what to do. In my case, and in the case of Loop, enter the carbs you ate and then put in the time that you ate it, and that's it. So that also part of the Tidepool Loop submission and part of the Tidepool Loop clearance. This is now another precedent created by the community, created by the Loop community, and now cleared in Tidepool Loop by the FDA. There is one feature in particular that I just want to name, honorable mention, that I know is really, really popular in DIY Loop. That's overrides. Overrides were not in DIY Loop at the time that the observational study started. We at Tidepool are working on the integration of overrides now. The human factors work, the clinical work behind it, and the design and development work. So that's happening now. That was not included in our FDA submission and is not in our FDA clearance. It is something that we're all very excited about. And as Howard mentioned, part of our FDA clearance is a process for how to submit changes to the FDA moving forward. And if we want to submit changes for overrides, that doesn't mean we need to re-review everything that we've done already, but we have a process set up with the FDA to review those changes. So we are very excited to be working on that. Another feature that I see actually Alana's asking about in chat is auto bolus. That was another feature that was not available in DIY Loop when the observational study happened and was not in our submission, but that is something that we are thinking about for upcoming releases of Tidepool Loop and upcoming submissions. Okay. I'm going to pause there and I'm going to hand it back over to Howard. Howard, do you want to talk about devices and device integrations?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for all the great questions, everyone. I hope we can get back to all these great questions in chat. So when we announced the Tidepool Loop project back in 2018, we announced that our initial development partner was Insulet, makers of the Omnipod. And then in 2019, we announced that both Medtronic and Dexcom had also been signed up as development partners. I'm very pleased to say that Dexcom is still very much an active development partner with Tidepool. Unfortunately, both Medtronic and Insulet have let us know that they will not be launch partners for Tidepool Loop. I can tell you that we are working with another ACE pump manufacturer. I unfortunately can't say who they are yet. It is a company that you've all heard of and a company that we believe everyone knows and loves. And we're very excited that we will have an integration with them going forward, but unfortunately, they're not ready to talk about their plans publicly yet. So I'm sure many folks are disappointed. We are too, of course, that neither Insulet nor Medtronic will be launch partners. However, we're continuing to work as closely as we can with multiple other device partners. I know there are lots of questions about who they will be. The thing that we're excited about, as I said earlier, is now that we have clearance, we can add new devices without a new filing. And just to address the obvious question, well, if you can't tell us who your launch partner is, can you tell us when the launch will be? And unfortunately, our launch partners aren't ready to talk about that yet either. So the good news here is we have clearance. We have FDA clearance for Tidepool Loop as an interoperable system. We will continue to work both to add new devices, and as Brandon said, this makes it much, much, much easier to continue to iterate on and improve Tidepool Loop, adding new features and functionality, and frankly, catching up with where DIY Loop is with things like overrides and auto bolus. All right, I think that's all the content we wanted to cover formally. And Joanne, should we just start at the top and start plowing through questions?
Yeah, I'm going to toss it over to Tina Hammer and Cassidy Robinson, and also admins with Loop and Learn, and we're just going to bounce questions to you. I'll put them on the spot. Okay, Tina, are you ready to go? I guess she's not. Cassidy, do you have one, or I'll just
Tina, you're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Does Tidepool Loop include the auto bolus option?
So the version of Tidepool Loop that we submitted to the FDA is actually from mid 2020. And at that time, the auto bolus feature was not part of the functionality. It was also not part of the clinical or the observational study of Loop. So the version that got cleared does not include the auto bolus feature. But as both Brandon and I were saying earlier, now that we have clearance, making changes and iterating upon what was cleared will be much more straightforward.
Okay. How about
are you guys, hey Tina, hold on one second. Can you guys expand a little bit on potential timing of those changes? Right, you've developed the SOP with the FDA, so what do the change timeframes look like? Is it quick, or are we expecting like 6 months plus until these changes can be pushed out to consumers?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Cassidy, and unfortunately it doesn't have a simple answer. The answer is it depends. It depends on lots of things. Straightforward changes like changes to training or minor changes to the user experience. Cybersecurity changes, the agency wants us to push those out quickly and without even interacting with them. Changes that require additional clinical evidence will take more time. And so, and the reason is, and it's a very good reason, the agency wants to know that the changes we're pushing out are safe and effective based on clinical evidence. And so a change, a fundamental change to the insulin delivery algorithm or the glucose prediction algorithm would require clinical evidence. Overrides is going to require clinical evidence. Now, the good news is now that we've done one study, it is much easier to do future studies. Like we have now collaborated with the Jabe Center for Health Research as an incredible clinical research partner. There are so many people using Loop that we believe that it'll be easy to recruit new people. And then just ongoing, we think it'll be much more straightforward to get studies done, but it will take some time. And we will need evidence for substantive changes to demonstrate to the agency that it's safe and effective.
Once you can demonstrate and the agency approves, what's the method for pushing the changes? Are we just App Store updating? What does that look like for us as the user?
That's exactly right. Tidepool Loop will be in the App Store, and we should probably have talked about that. So one of the big benefits of Tidepool Loop is you won't have to build it yourself. It will be an app in the App Store that you download just like any other app in the App Store. It will require a prescription. So we've created a healthcare provider portal where your doctor, your endocrinologist will log into the portal and create a prescription. You'll then receive an activation code through email or text message. And that activation code is what unlocks the features and functionality of Tidepool Loop. It also will download your initial set of settings that, in collaboration with your healthcare provider, get created, but then you can go in and modify those settings because, as we all know, diabetes is a self-managed disease.
Howard, here's a great question. Is there anything that was in the submission that we had to change, like Dexcom having to take out the silence all feature in the G7?
Wow, that's a great question. We did have to make changes based on agency feedback. I will say the agency was very reasonable when it came to alerts and alarms, and what we came with, I hope everybody will be pleased with. It will be possible to mute alarms for long periods of time, for example, and if you have a situation, whether it's a wedding or a concert or whatever, you'll be able to make sure alarms are really, really silent for a period of time. There were definitely things in the submission that needed to change based on agency feedback. They had all kinds of questions for us over our what's called V&V, verification and validation activities, cybersecurity. We had lots of iteration on how we presented the clinical data to them. But in terms of the core functionality of Loop, really the things that Brandon showed are the fundamental changes. So there are constraints on the target range between 87 and 180, and we did do some work on alerts and alarms like I just described.
Can you clarify, because this was in the chat, did the pre-meal setting, are we sitting at 80 like we are in 3, most of us now, or is that at 87 as well?
I wish I could answer that off the top of my head. Do you know that, Brandon?
Yeah, that's lower than 87. I believe that
L3 is 80.
We should look it up and not make sure we get the number exactly right, unless you know the number for sure, Brandon.
So actually, it's the lower limit is limited by the glucose suspend number, and the upper limit is limited by what you set your lower level of your correction. So it's kind of, unless Tidepool Loop has a different glucose suspend, which I don't believe, because our guardrails were tightly controlled in Loop 3 to match Tidepool.
The lower limit on pre-meal range is 67, or
That's more like it.
or your suspend threshold. So if your suspend threshold is higher than 67, then your suspend threshold will be your lower limit. Otherwise, it'll be 67.
Yeah, and that's the same as Loop 3. So Cassie, if you think you've got a different limit, you can change that.
Yeah, you might be at 80 because that's your suspend threshold.
It was self-chosen. I just didn't know that. Thank you guys for clarifying.
Can you talk a little bit about the training that there will be for users, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have developed in-app curriculum, which actually we have published as part of our commitment to open source. So some of you may have seen that in-app training. And we've also developed I'll call it hard copy or online training, more traditional training, both for people living with diabetes and healthcare providers. So over the course of the upcoming months, we'll start making all that available on our website. We're actually permitted to publish all that now that we're cleared. And so now that we have clearance, we'll start making all that available.
That is
I
very
have-
exciting.
I have a follow-up question about that, because that is probably one of our biggest challenges in Loop and Learn is training, onboarding, and helping people understand how to drive this Ferrari that's a powerful device. Is your training, or are you able to say whether it's interactive? Does it take it by steps? And is there support behind that for people that seem to be going into little ditches?
Yeah, so right now it takes two forms. What we submitted to the FDA was the training that is in-app that you go through during the setup process of Loop, and that is modestly interactive. And it also takes the form of a more traditional user guide and healthcare provider guide. And those are just, documents that are hundreds of pages, similar to the types of user manuals that you've seen with other products. Now that we have those cleared, we can create other forms of training based on that same content. And I would expect us to do that as well.
Will patients be able to access the healthcare provider documentation?
As far as I know, there are no restrictions on us publishing the healthcare provider guide.
Okay, that's great. I want to shift this to partners. I'm sure that's kind of in the forefront. So you haven't talked much about CGM announced partners.
I mentioned Dexcom is still an active development partner with us, and we're very excited to be working closely with them. I saw some questions float by in chat about Abbott, Eversense, other partners. We have no other CGM partners to announce at this time. I will say, I often joke, our dance card is not full, and we will gladly add other compatible iCGMs. And again, because of the standard operating procedures that we agreed upon with the agency, we can do that without a new submission as long as they meet the agency's requirements for an iCGM and our requirements for an iCGM.
Is there anything our community can do to help you push CGM manufacturers?
Just
saying that as
let them know what you're interested in seeing.
Okay, we can do that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I know all of this is in development and changing by the moment. So your US based is your first and primary focus right now?
Yes, the clearance we just received is US FDA clearance. We absolutely positively want to bring Loop to the whole world, and we will get there as fast as we possibly can. And same answer to Android. Obviously, the DIY Loop system was based on iOS and written for an iPhone, so that was the obvious place for us to start. But our mission, our goal as a nonprofit, is to make our technology as broadly available in the most equitable way possible. And so obviously being available on Android is really important to us too. We have nothing to announce in terms of availability, and it's going to take more development partners and more funding partners to make that happen, but we're absolutely committed to porting to Android as well.
Hey, a question about settings. Can multiple profiles be used, such as for different times of the month or different activities that you have regularly scheduled?
Go ahead, Brandon.
In the version of Tidepool Loop that is cleared, we don't have, as I mentioned before, we don't have overrides in there yet. The idea of multiple profiles, beyond what you would see in DIY today, we have not diverged from that path. So we're kind of following the same pathway to date as what you've seen in the DIY app.
Are you considering including the custom type 1 patches that many of the loopers are using now? That includes a switcher patch where you can switch from temp basal to auto bolus. Obviously, you'd have to get auto bolus approval first, but it allows you to switch between those at a certain blood glucose level that you choose.
As we investigate as we design these updates into Tidepool Loop, for instance, overrides, auto bolus, we spend a lot of time interviewing folks who may have used similar features or be using similar features or not using similar features to understand how they're using it. And so, you know, DIY Loop has certainly been an inspiration from us, and it was the starting code base that we started everything with. But we put our own design and rigorous human factors process behind it. And I believe what comes out the other end is improvements where, you know, what's amazing about the DIY community is how it's been able to have so many different variants, different features, different ideas, and some of them really take off, some of them don't. It's an incredible natural and organic way to see, you know, what's the cream of the crop, what floats to the top, what makes the most sense. And then when we start to understand how these things are being used, that's all part of our design process, is these user experience interviews. So there's certainly an opportunity, Ellen, to look through all of that and see how do we take the best of all of these worlds and turn it into the user experience that we're going to put out there.
I've got three different questions, but they're meaty ones. So can you ask these guys to clearly explain the basics? So the algorithm is approved, but until the one pump partner rolls out their partnership, nothing can be done. Or is Tidepool Loop available to DIY loopers, or only through prescription with the one pump partner? And is the app free, or is there a maintenance fee? There's a lot in there.
There is a lot. Let me try to unpack that. So the answer to the first question is we cannot put Tidepool Loop in the App Store until there is a cleared compatible ACE pump also available. The FDA was very clear about that. They don't want Tidepool Loop to be used with other pumps in an off-label way. They only want it to operate with cleared compatible ACE pumps and cleared compatible iCGM devices. The good news is there is a cleared compatible iCGM device, the Dexcom G6, and we have another ACE pump development partner that we anticipate when they're ready will let the world know about their cleared compatible ACE pump that will work with Tidepool Loop. That was the first part of that question.
Any timeline on that one? No,
they are not ready to talk about their timeline, unfortunately. Okay. The good news is we're ready as soon as they're ready.
So are we.
Yep. I think the second part of that question is Tidepool Loop available without a prescription? Did I get that right?
Oh, is it to DIY loopers, or and does it require a prescription with only the one pump partner, or will it be for itself, or is it free?
Got it. So Tidepool Loop will require a prescription. All of the code that we have developed is open source code, and I know that other folks in the DIY community have taken advantage of and both in both directions, contributed changes to our source code base and taken changes out of our source code base and moved it over to DIY Loop. And we intend to continue to be an open source organization, and so that will continue. In terms of cost, we don't have any pricing to announce at this point. That's going to depend on how our development partners want to think about distribution. There are a lot of possibilities. We obviously, as a not-for-profit, like to make it available as low cost as we possibly can. And so the development partners may be able to subsidize that, or may be able to bundle it with reimbursement opportunities that they're pursuing. But that's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more time with our device development partners.
And will it be a maintenance fee, or upgrade fees, or as things change?
Same answer. Still working that through with our device partners.
So when there's an improvement to the Tidepool Loop algorithm, are you able to instantly upgrade the change?
So are we able to instantly upgrade changes to Tidepool Loop? Similar answer to before, it depends. If it's something that is simple and straightforward, such as a change to the user guide or the in-app training, yes, it's low risk and we should be able to push it out without any interactions with the agency. If it is something that requires clinical data or that is part of a predefined agreement that where the agency wants us to come back to them, then we'll need to generate more data and do another submission.
Okay, that was one question. The second one, what is your best guess, Howard, for seeing Tidepool Loop's partner pump be available for sale, prescribable, reimbursable? Do you have any sense of 1 month, 6 months, 12, 18?
I think it is going to be measured in months, but probably not a small number of months. It is probably not, hopefully not measured in years, but I wouldn't want to set expectations that it is in the imminent near future. It's really dependent on our device partners and they've got more work to do.
Okay, and I'll try one more time because I have to ask. The pump partner that you were discussing, I'm just going to ask, I know I'm not going to get an answer. Is it a tube pump?
Fortunately, I can't. I think I probably already shared as much as I can share about the pump partner, but thanks for asking.
Is it bigger than a bread box?
It is definitely smaller than a bread box, at least my bread box.
All right, we're good with that. There was a question about IOB, insulin on board, which a lot of DIY loopers use as their guidelines, but it's not available, I believe, in your app. And was wondering how you've addressed IOB. Is it the same as we're seeing in the DIY loop?
So I'm going to go ahead and screen share again. You've got the same active insulin chart that you're used to seeing, different color, insulin delivery history. And then if I scroll back a few slides, here you can see on the Apple Watch active insulin as well. So, you know, I think unless there's a specific element of the user experience that you're used to, Joanne, that you want to ask for more details about, you know, from my perspective, active insulin is represented in Tidepool Loop. I don't keep track of all of the different versions of DIY Loop, but certainly it's there.
Okay, I have one more, and then Cassidy, you can grab the next one. Will Tidepool Loop continuing development, make use of the existing DIY communities or establish a new forum for the work you're doing and want to provide?
Not sure I completely follow the question. We will definitely, as Brandon said earlier, pay very close attention to DIY Loop communities, the Loop and Learn group, the Looped Facebook group. You know, obviously it's an incredible source of information as we think about how Tidepool Loop is going to evolve. I don't know if that answers the question.
Use your own forum for that as well?
Will we use our own
forum?
Will
have a Facebook group or some sort of forum for?
Well, we already have a Facebook page. There's no separate group. Whether we create a separate support group for Tidepool Loop users specifically, I think the community will tell us if that's something important.
Okay.
I don't have a strong feeling about it.
Okay. Cassidy or Tina?
So you've established, thank you for us, that it's going to be a bit of time until we're like prescription ready and pump ready for like patients to be using Tidepool Loop actively. So now that you have some time, how are you recruiting healthcare partners? I mean, actual prescription writers. Because I don't know if you guys know this, Loop and Learn is maintaining an active database of really happy endos and healthcare providers that help us a lot in DIY Loop. And one of the biggest changes that's going to happen now is we will stop getting kicked out of providers' offices, because how can you kick us out for doing something that the FDA said, hey, cool, this algorithm is great. What's your plan for recruiting healthcare providers?
I'm going to let Brandon take this one because he talks to healthcare providers every single day.
So we do talk to healthcare providers every single day. I have been on the Loop and Learn list of Loop-friendly healthcare providers. I love it. I went on and my healthcare provider was on it. And I was like, yes. And so I think that's a great list. By the way, I also maintain my own personal list of healthcare providers who are looping. So that's been fun as well. Loop and Learn, if you want to start maintaining that list as well, feel
Bring
free.
it,
Yes.
please. Yes.
So, and you know, we have well over 1,000 clinics that use Tidepool's data management platform to manage care for more than 300,000 people with diabetes. And that's on a regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly basis. And that's growing significantly. I think so far this month, we've added something like 16,000, more than 17,000 new users to the Tidepool data management platform. So that's used in clinics all over the country. We have a presence at all the major diabetes conferences. So I think, you know, between the conversations that we're already having, the clinician usage of our current interoperable platform, you know, I think we're well positioned to get the word out about Tidepool Loop. Yeah, no, that's generally how we'll approach it. I think our marketing team probably has a much more sophisticated plan in place than what I've just described. But that's just to give you an idea of the scope and the resources that we have right now.
Should the app become something that is paid or maintenance fee based, is there a pathway or the brainstorm of a pathway for Medicare coverage?
So in order to get insurance reimbursement, you have to demonstrate that there is a good reason for the insurance company, whether public or private, should be covering it. I do believe that over time we will either ourselves or with our partners start gathering claims data and demonstrating that it is absolutely worth reimbursing. I think we all know as DIY loopers, it clearly increases quality of life and makes effective outcomes much more likely. So I'm pretty confident that that will be possible to do, but we haven't started that process yet. The good thing about partnering with companies that do that for a living is they're very, very good at it. And so I think the best bet will probably be for us to partner with organizations that already know how to do reimbursement well.
Awesome.
Okay, there's
Tina,
an
if you've got anything in there.
Okay, for changes that require collecting data and going back to the FDA, what is that process like and how long does it take? I know there are a lot of changes going on at the FDA as well, and this is new to you as well, but any ballpark of?
Yeah, it all depends. You know, clinical studies can go very quickly, not typically days, but you know, clinical studies can start and finish within months. Again, it depends on the scope of the changes, how many people you need to recruit into the study, you know, what the there's this concept of powering a study, which is how many people do you need, and do you need one or multiple arms of the study in order to demonstrate safety or efficacy for whatever your endpoints in the study are. So unfortunately, there's no one simple answer to that. I do hope and I do imagine and I dream about a world where there's always, like you see in the consumer electronics world or like you see in other software situations, there's always a next version, you know, call it a beta if you want, but there's always a next future version being studied. And I think over time we will get better and the industry will get better and the FDA will get better at accommodating iterative changes like that. We're not there yet, but it's definitely something I want to keep pushing on.
Can you tell us how Tidepool Loop is different from Loop 3?
I cannot. Brandon, can you?
You know, I feel like my official answer should be, I am not an expert in Loop 3. We are here to talk about Tidepool Loop, and doing comparisons between different systems is like maybe not the right thing for us to be doing. That maybe is my official answer. I believe that a lot, Howard talked earlier about developers in the DIY community taking the code that has been created by Tidepool and actually contributing it into DIY. And I think a lot of that has happened in DIY Loop 3. So I think there's more overlap than ever at this point, which I'm excited to say. There are some things, the DIY looping community just stays out ahead of everybody else, which is just incredible. Tidepool Loop does not have G7 support. Nobody does, except for DIY Loop. There are a lot of things that you're going to keep seeing in the latest releases of DIY Loop that, frankly, we and the rest of the industry are going to be playing catch up to. So, but I think that's something that we should all be really excited about.
If I can pile on here, a question I get asked a lot is, so what does this mean for the DIY community? And I'll tell you, as an early participant, my daughter was, one of the first 20-ish or so people on Open APS and one of the very early people on DIY Loop. I believe the DIY community plays a really important role and will always represent the leading edge of innovation. I believe there will always be a category of people that would rather be on that leading edge of innovation. And I also think there's a probably much larger category of people who would rather just get an app out of the App Store and not have to worry about building it themselves. So the DIY community is not going to go away. There will always be innovation. There will always be people trying the new greatest next thing. Our goal was to take that innovation and put it through a regulatory quality management system so that there could be an alternative for the people who don't want to build it themselves and don't want to live out on that leading edge of innovation.
So this is getting the awesome of DIY as best you can into the hands of the many.
That's exactly right. That was the goal. Let's make an FDA cleared version of the thing we know and love so that everybody can take advantage of that, even if they don't want to participate as a do-it-yourselfer.
Okay, I have basically two more, and then we'll let you actually have dinner or whatever you need to do this evening. And I think a lot of us are trying to wrap our heads around, what does it mean that you don't have your pump partners and your CGM partners lined up? What is that? It's real excitement, and then you go, wait, but it's not there yet. So the question here is that a sign that they don't support some aspect of what you're doing?
It's a great question. And I think, sorry, Howard, if I can just take a stab at this.
Yeah, go for
it. Taking a step back, as Howard talked about before, Tidepool Loop just got cleared as the first truly interoperable glycemic controller. And that established a precedent. And I think it shouldn't surprise us that it's not just the first for the FDA. It's a first for the industry. And some things are going to be a little bit different. Historically, these controllers have been manufactured by the insulin pump company and submitted to the FDA by the insulin pump company. And so, they get to control the show and say when they're going to launch. We're trying to push into a future where it's not just Tidepool Loop as an independent glycemic controller. There could be many. And it makes sense that they would get FDA clearance before all of the commercial work is done. When you're an insulin pump company making your own closed loop, there's not a lot of commercial work that you need to do in terms of partnerships, right? You need one, your CGM partner. But this is a new precedent. And I think that it is indicative that we're going to see things done a little bit differently moving forward. And it might not be unusual to get FDA clearance months before you can actually launch, because these insulin pump companies, or the partner companies, I should say, want to see that you get FDA clearance before they invest the time into sorting out all of the commercial stuff. So this might be a new way that things happen. And it's actually, while from one perspective, it feels like it's taking longer. It's actually accelerating things because we're getting these FDA clearances more often, and pushing the whole industry forward.
But to put it a little in perspective, when we talked to the FDA about a year ago, I actually said the word integrated or independent systems, and how are we going to get this? And you could see their faces drop, and they did not want to talk anymore, and they actually muted. It was a topic they weren't comfortable with. They don't fully understand it. So that they made this move is amazing. And when we heard the rumors that Dexcom and Insulet were going to partner, one was going to buy the other, there was an outcry in the community because that locks up partners. And that just works against what we're all trying to do, is give the consumer choice. You know, I want to pick the pump, the color of the pump, the size of the CGM, and the flavor of the app, and the colors they use. I mean, it's what you're working for, and it's what we want to hear. So that's what's so extraordinary about this approval. It took the FDA to get out of their thinking a little bit, and good job for pushing this through. It's pretty extraordinary. So I'll ask you one more question, and then after this I will publish the chat questions, send them to you guys if you want to kind of give some feedback on it, or even just know what people are asking, although I'm sure you've heard. That's just a very simple question. What is your 5-year dream for this?
Ooh, I don't have my crystal ball. Oh, here it is. I usually joke that my crystal ball only sees like 12 months into the future. So, but I'll do my best. So my daughter lives with type 1, and what I really want for her and what I really want for the community is to be able to live life as fully and robustly as possible, with the diabetes taking as little a part of her life as is possible. I want her to be able to just live like any other 23-year-old can live, and to not have to worry about it. Obviously, the best possible outcome would be a cure. Like if we could cure type 1, and, you know, please keep giving money to all the researchers that are doing all the research that will someday make that possible. That is clearly what we all want. Until that happens, for me, the next best thing is closed loop automated insulin delivery. And to the extent that we can make AID systems easy to use, make them require as little human interaction as possible, I imagine a world where, you know, with faster insulins and better infusion sets, they can work even better. I believe it will ultimately be possible with automated insulin delivery systems to live a completely, I won't say burden-free, but as low burden as is humanly possible based on these systems. So what our part in this is pushing the envelope on what is possible to do in the broadest, most accessible way possible. You know, my daughter was on OpenAPS, my daughter was on Loop. I love the DIY community, but that only works for folks that are really willing to dive in, like you all are, roll up your sleeves, build the code yourself, figure all the stuff out. That doesn't scale. And what we really wanted to do was start taking steps both with interoperability and with the regulatory process to get that to scale. So between the work we're doing with our interoperable data management platform and the work we're doing with Tidepool Loop and pushing on the agency's processes through our involvement in the pre-cert program and this 510K submission, like that's the role we can play, is to try to make this as broadly accessible as we possibly can.
That's amazing. I did say that was the last one, but it isn't. Someone did make a comment. One of our T1D medical doctors said you also need AID systems approved for pregnant women with T1D. So
Absolutely.
I had to put that out there. And let's close, because this is kind of interesting. Why is it called Tidepool?
Oh, I can tell you the really good story, and then I'll tell you the truth. So the really good story, if you look at the logo here, I have it on my water bottle. The first few letters there are T1D right there, and we're pooling the resources of the community. And then we didn't think of this back then, but if you read it backwards, it says loop edit. So that's kind of cool as well. So that's the good story. The tide is like the ocean waves coming and going, similar to how blood glucose comes and goes and rises and falls, and then eventually it all recedes and you're left with this beautiful ecosystem and this gorgeous harmonious tide pool in front of you. That's the great story. The truth is, we worked with a naming consultancy called 100 Monkeys. They actually worked for us pro bono for free, which was amazing back in 2013. And then we looked at probably 100 different names, and actually have the little the notebook that shows some of the other names. This is a page out of their notebook. So we're not Phylum, we're not Ranger, we're not Orbiter. We ended up with Tidepool, and it turned out the domain name was available, and a very gracious, generous nonprofit in Seattle that was devoted to ocean-based causes was willing to grant us rights to the domain name for very little money, and we're very grateful to them.
I love all those stories. Those are wonderful.
That's
There you
great.
go.
What a great way to close this. Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you for taking all my messages, saying so when are we doing this? Thank you for, I know you're busy. Thank you for doing the work you're doing. We understand it. We appreciate it. Anyone with kids knows that they sleep through the night. Thank you. We'll be back in touch. This will be put up on YouTube, and I will send you all the links. So very much appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you, Joanne, for organizing tonight, for having us join. I want to say to everybody here, please go to tidepool.org/loop, sign up for more information so that you're up to speed on all the updates. Folks were asking, hey, if you've got suggestions, where should you send them? Please send them to support@tidepool.org, and you might be called on to participate in a user experience interview. Thank you all to the entire looping community for everything that you do, because we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if it weren't for you doing what you're doing. So thanks, everybody. It's a team effort.
Thanks, everyone. I'm so grateful for this community, and thank you, Joanne, for having us on.
All right,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.